This house was built in 1786. Being a military person, Wheedon called it his Sentry Box. We have a picture of this house heavily damaged in 1864. Found a piece of the shell when we were doing work on the air conditioning system that did some of the damage. There was hand-to-hand fighting around this house. We have any number of accounts of that. The pontoon bridge was right below here. It was all kind of activity here. I know the regiment that defended this house, 17th Mississippi. Confederates contested the river crossing right behind here. The Union Army crossed and pushed the Confederates out and occupied this part of town, the street, right on Caroline Street. In fact, the first time that a city was sacked in this country was right in Fredericksburg and right on this street. And I have an account of a Union soldier from Connecticut right on the street that talks about what he saw. One of the things he said was that the people of Fredericksburg were evidently well educated by the quality of the books we have thrown out of their houses. You had intense fighting here, and then that was one day before the Battle of Fredericksburg, or 2 days before the Battle of Fredericksburg. Then you had the Union Army sacking this part of town and other parts of town. So a tremendous amount of activity here. You had activity here in 1862 when there was no fighting. Lincoln crossed on a pontoon bridge right behind this house and came up and made his speech at the old National Bank building. The house was built in 1786 by General Wheedon. General Wheedon and General Hugh Mercer married two sisters from Fredericksburg. And Wheedon was childless, and when Mercer was killed at the Battle of Princeton in the Revolution, then Mercer's family was brought in here and to live with the Wheedons. The back part of this house was an addition put on prior to 1795 to accommodate the Mercer family. Confederate General Hugh Wheedon Mercer was born in this house. And he moved to Savannah, Georgia, built the Mercer house that was famous in the book Midnight in the Garden. And Johnny Mercer, the songwriter, came from that line. I always knew that this house, that my mother's name was Wheedon, and that General George Wheedon built the house, and we had some connection to General Wheedon. When we were going to be married, we had purchased a little house over in Ferry Farm, 2-bedroom house, subdivision, and this house was on the market, and I decided to buy it. I called Mary when she was in school and said, would you mind living in a big house? And I called her on the phone probably 2 months before we were going to be married and said, I bought this house, would you mind living here? Her parents advised her to say no, because they had been from families that lived in the country with big houses that were hard to take care of. But she said, what's she going to say? She said yes. She never saw this house until we came back from our honeymoon and walked through the front door. And it was in terrible shape, terrible, terrible shape. The people that had lived here were an elderly lady, a Fredericksburg family, been here a long time, but they had just given up taking care of it. Termite damage. It had been modernized in the 1920s, but not since then. So we had a 1920s kitchen, a 1920s heating system. My interest in history was encouraged by my mother, who was a confidant and worker with Miss Annie Smith, who saved Kenmore. Most people don't know this story, but in the 40s, late 40s, my mother and Miss Annie Smith took a 7-week trip to the West Coast raising money for Kenmore. My mother was the chauffeur or the driver, and Miss Annie Smith didn't drive. So they had a brand new Plymouth, straight shift car. My mother left here, had never been out west, and drove to California, up to Seattle, back to Chicago, and back here, visiting regents of Kenmore, raising money for Kenmore. Now, my father said that was the eighth wonder of the world. Fredericksburg has changed a great deal, just like the entire country has changed. Fredericksburg survived the Depression because of the Sylvania plant. You know, so there were jobs here. But this area really didn't start to grow until after World War II. It was, you know, we had the college and we had the hospital, but they were small things. And the FMC plant, that was it. I would think that we just were a normal, small southern town where everybody knew everybody. There was no great wealth. There was no big manufacturing plants, no, you know, except the FMC. Small business, the lumber, you know, the building supply and the churches and the, you know, those kind of things. Very interesting as far as I'm concerned that I thought Fredericksburg was not as segregated as some people might think. You know, there were different locations in the town where blacks and whites lived side by side. I thought that was a little unusual, but I didn't know any different. Growing up in a small town here, you know, you had one high school. The big athletic event of the year was Thanksgiving Day when James Monroe played Stafford. And for many years, that was, I mean, everybody went. Went to church first, you know, then you went to the football game at Maury Stadium, the same place you go now.